Good morning, everyone. My name is Pam Chase, and I want to welcome you to my channel. Today we're going to be working on a very loose, quick, spontaneous watercolor painting of just some trees and some water reflections. I have been enjoying these fall colors, even though the trees really haven't begun to change yet. My palette is beginning to change from the greens of summer to some warmer colors of fall. So I thought I'd jump on and just kind of get us in the fall mood, the autumn mood, with some colors in the trees and the water. So thank you for being here, and let's get started painting. The colors that I'm using are going to be in the yellow and red family. So I'm going to stick mainly with my bright yellows on this part of my palette. I'm going to be using some reds and rose colors, magentas, on this side of my palette, and a little green and maybe a little brown, but I'm going to stay away from the blues. There will be no blue in this picture, and that's going to give us a nice fresh fall color to our painting. So I thought I'd start by showing you how I mix my colors. This is the leftover paint from the last painting that I did, and we're going to kind of reproduce this painting, although it may look a lot different because this is a spontaneous painting. I don't have a plan for the painting other than it's going to be trees and water reflections. So I'm going to let the watercolor take me where it will. I'm using just student grade paper. This is the kind of paper that you can buy in bulk, and it's very inexpensive. It's the kind that high school teachers will buy for their art classes. So I wouldn't use this for a painting that you're going to frame, but for practice and just experimenting with watercolor, it's fine. The problem with it not being good to use to frame is it has a little bit of a gray tint to it, and it's also a pulp paper, so it doesn't bear up to any kind of lifting or scraping. But since we're not doing lifting and scraping today, I'm just going to go ahead and use the student grade watercolor paper. Okay, so let's mix some paint, and I'm going to show you how I got these colors that I used on this painting here. So I've got 4 wells in my palette, and I'm going to mix in this first well. I'm just going to add some paint to it to freshen it up a little bit, since I am basically using the same colors that I used before. So for my yellows, the main color in my yellows is this nickel azo yellow, and this well has a little bit of Van Dyke brown in it, which is fine because the nickel azo is almost neon. It is very, very bright. So whenever you use it, you do have to knock it back quite a bit, unless you want quite a bit of punch on a section of your painting that's going to be yellow, and it will pack a punch, so you have to be careful with that one. The next color that I am going to use quite a bit of here is the Quinn burnt orange, which is very mixable. It's very friendly with other colors, and it's a rather bright orange too. So since we're doing this bright fall painting, it is just perfect. So there's some Quinn orange. Now I'm going to move for fall. One of the most beautiful combinations of colors are the rose and magentas with orange. I just love that combination, and you see it a lot in the trees as they turn those beautiful fall colors. So we're going to put some Quinn rose mixed with a little Quinn magenta here. And I have some opera rose on my palette, and I'm just going to put a little bit of that in there as well. Now opera rose is what we call a fugitive color because it will fade when it's exposed to sunlight. So in this mix, it's not going to matter that much that I'm using a fugitive color because it's being mixed with other permanent archival colors. So we have got a nice yellow, a nice orange, and a nice magenta mixed up there. And the other color that we're going to use is brown. Now, normally I'll mix my own browns, but I'm going to use a convenience brown. I'm going to use what we call a burnt umber because it's a warmer brown. I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to mix a little bit of it here, and you'll see later on that to darken that up, I can put in some of the purple, which is really, I've got Diox purple and I've got Carb Violet on my palette in the purples here. I've got Diox purple here and a Carb Violet that I can mix with this brown that's going to give me a very dark color when it comes time to put in some of the land that separates our trees from our water. So here we've got a pretty good palette going, and we move that off to the side a little bit, and I've got my water pot here. I also have a spray bottle and a container of clear water to wash my brushes. Okay, so let's get started painting. And I'm going to be working on a little bit of a slant, so I'm going to put a little riser behind my paper pad here that I just clipped this piece of paper onto a piece of cardboard. It may buckle a little bit, but that doesn't really bother me too much. As the paper dries, it will flatten out. And with this kind of paper, as I said, we're not going to be framing anything, so we don't have to worry about that too much. We're just practicing. But if you really, really like the result and want to frame it, I'll give you a little hint. You can use an iron and iron that painting flat, and it will be just as flat as it was when you took the paper out of the package. It works beautifully. Okay, so we're going to start with the trees, and I'm going to be using a technique that I learned from Johannes Vloedhuis, who is a watercolor teacher online, and he is fabulous. I'll leave his name in the comments below so that you can find him. He's a wonderful teacher, and I've really learned a lot from him, so I'll pass that credit along where credit is due. He does wonderful trees using this technique that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to use my sprayer bottle. Make sure you're about 6 to 8 inches away from the paper, and give the paper one pretty, I'd say a medium spritz. Here I'm going to do it more than once, but depending on how the droplets come out, I want to have a wet, I want wet droplets on my paper and not really a completely saturated surface. So I'm just picking up a little bit of the paper, and here you can see I've got just kind of spatter on the paper. And what will happen is it will help me to make those leaf shapes. Now I'm going to start with my brightest color. And let me move this over so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to go into this nickel azo mixture, and I'm using a Winsor & Newton 1/2 inch flat, and I'm going to be using the side of my brush. Oops, I got a little bit into that orange, which is okay. And I'm going to hold my brush, not like a pencil, but I'm going to hold my brush flat this way, and I'm just going to touch the paper, and I'm going to leave little white spaces, because in trees you have sky holes in trees, And that's where the branches will go later, if we decide to put branches in our trees. This time we may or may not. We'll see how it goes, because I'm letting the watercolor direct my steps. What it gives me is what I'll use. Okay, so there's one clump of foliage in a tree, and now I'm going to pick up a little bit of the orange because it's important to vary the colors here. And I'm trying not to keep things too round. I'm trying to keep them more as like a tree line. And we have little wisps of the branches in the distance that you kind of see on the edges. The edges here are kind of important. I should say they're most important. Okay, so now I'm going to pick up some of that pink, and I'm going to go back in here. It's a little bit too wet, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of that moisture with my paper towel, and just let that do its thing a little bit. And think in like areas and sections. You know, like don't spread your color out all over the place. If you're working with pink or magenta, kind of keep that grouped together. All right, now I'm going to go in with a little bit of that brown, because we do see brown. I'm going to combine that with a little bit. See, I picked up some of my brown, and then I just went in and picked up a little bit of that yellow. And we're going to go to the other side. And let's, again, experiment with where you hold your brush. You may hold it up, but if you move back, you're going to get some different looser marks on your page. And don't keep going over and over things. Just put the color down, leave it, and let it do its thing. All right, so I'm going to get the rest of my tree line in here. And I'm thinking about my horizon line, which is going to be a little lower than the center of my paper. I'm now just taking some of my very light color and putting in some far away foliage. The more water and the less pigment, the further away that foliage is going to appear. So I'm just dropping in a few of those far away wispy tree foliage on the top. Okay, now let's go into some of this brown. I'm thinking about the foreground, and I'm just going to drop in. You don't want a straight line across. You want to make some interesting landforms as you establish your foreground here. Okay, and that's just a matter of your artistic freedoms and preferences, keeping in mind that you want the darkest paint where the trees meet the ground. So here I'm going to just put in some, I call it just stuff. And now under that is going to be your water. And the water generally reflects the sky color. So I'm going to pick up that nickel azo again, mix it with some of that orange. I'm going to pick up some of all of the colors, because water is really a reflection of the sky. And now I'm going to use a different stroke for the water. So I'm starting from the left, and I'm going to sweep my brush all the way across. That's a little bright, so I'm going to go in and pick up some of my green. This is green gold, so it's really not what you would think of as a typical green. I'm using the side of my brush, and I'm leaving lots of white space, especially closer to the foreground. I'm leaving all of those sparkles on the water. Watch what the watercolor is doing and stop. Don't lose all of your white here. You want to keep a lot of that. Right, so basically this is your first wash. You have trees, you have where the trees are meeting maybe some denser trees, and then your land and coming out into the water. All right, now we need some reflections. So I'm going to switch brushes and pick up my fan brush. I'm just going to get it wet and then just dry it off a little bit on the paper towel. I'm going to start a little below the land where I feel like my water is starting, and I'm just going to do some downward strokes. And with that water on there, so I had a little drop, and I'm going to pick that little drop of water up because otherwise I'll get a back run, and I don't want that. And you get the feel, you will get the feel for how much water to have in this fan brush as you're making these reflections. Okay, so I'm coming straight down. This is just a very simple, almost abstract painting. Don't get too fussy with it. We're looking for texture and color, and that is about it. All right, so we're going to let that begin to dry just a little bit, and I'm going to pick up a different brush. This is what we call a sword brush, and this particular one is a medium sword from the Ron Ranson set. And you can look, I have another video that talks about the Ron Ranson set by Pro Art, which I absolutely love, so make sure you check that out in my videos, and you'll see what comes in that set and where you can get that. Okay, so now I'm going to go back into a darker brown, and this is a Van Dyke brown. This is a cooler brown, and I'm going to go back up here and reinforce some of this where the land and water meet. Just do this randomly and let the watercolor direct your steps here. I'm going to pick up a different shade of brown. I'm purposefully staying away from black because I want this painting to be very warm, and to do that you need a lot of these fall colors of browns and golds and reds. Okay, so let's use some vertical strokes just for variety. And we will you have to be a little careful here. You have to be a little careful here because the paper is starting to buckle, so it's a little difficult to get in those little valleys, but just take your time and it's really not that much of a problem. Okay. All right. Cleaning off my brush and just looking to see what my painting needs. Okay, I think once this begins to dry a little bit more, I'll begin to put some tree trunks and branches in. And I think I'll just go ahead and stick with the sword brush to do that. It has a nice point on it. Um, so we can go ahead and use a, otherwise I would use a rigger. I would use something like this. But I think today I'll just stick with the sword brush. All right, so let's go into, now be careful here, a mistake that I have made so many times and I see other people making is that when you're putting your branches in, you put the branch color is too dark. So I want to make sure that my branch color is not darker than this color that I just put in for the land. All right, so I'm going to start with some vertical strokes here. I'm just going to put in a couple where my main tree trunks are going to be. And so I'll have two kind of close together. Let's have another one that's even closer. You don't want to have things like perfectly spaced out. You want to have them kind of staggered. All right, and so there we're going to have a couple of trees. Maybe over here we'll have a couple of shorter trees. Okay, so you just kind of get those in. And, okay, let's start with that. All right. Now we have a couple of branches coming off of this tree. Try to, you never want to have parallel branches, and you don't want to have branches that look too much alike. You want them all to look different. Some heavier, some thinner. Okay, and I think over here, you don't, the point is you don't want things to look the same on both sides. You want things to look different on either side. So now I need some more foliage. So let's go back in and use a little bit of a stronger color because these trees are going to be closer than the trees that we put in the background. So we need a thicker paint and some stronger color. And this is just, you know, practice. All right, so I'm going to use the same flat, the side of the flat brush that I used before, just very light touches here. And in fact, I'm going to take some of that pigment off, so I can get some more interesting edges on my trees and still leave some sky holes. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of that brown for the underneath is where your shadow is, so you want to kind of put a darker color under there. All right, now I'm going to pick up some more of this green gold because I want a different color here. But I did not clean out my brush, so I still had some of that orange in there from before. I just added some green gold. Okay, and I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that pigment here and there. And that one, leave some sunlight shining through. Let's make this tree a grouping. So our trees are looking different. They're not looking like two lollipops. It's two very distinct groupings of trees. You can even see a little pathway between the trees there. Some very fluffy edges. Okay. And we're almost done. Just want to add just a little bit of dry brush on the bottom. And that is basically how you would get a good start on a very spontaneous and loose landscape painting for fall. Okay, so to finish this painting off, I am using a dip pen or a quill pen. Some people call it, I think that a quill pen is a little bit different, but so it's a dip pen, and what I'm doing is loading it with watercolor instead of ink. It works very well. You just have to break your pen in a little bit when you first get them. I'll leave the link for these pens. They're very inexpensive. I think I got 2 pens and a bunch of nibs for under $10, so they come in really handy. Takes a little bit of practice to use one, but once you get the hang of it, you will love it for thin lines. And you can see I already started putting some thin lines in for branches and trunks of my trees just to bring those out. So I loaded my nib, and the thing that helped me the most learn how to use this is you have to kind of lean to one side of the nib, because there is the nib separates at the tip, and you have to get that nib to separate a little bit before the ink will start to flow. So it does take a little bit of practice to use these pens, but as you can see, you get a really nice fine line. And I use this to finish up paintings like this with trees and other things too, pretty often. It just really helps to define things. And since it's watercolor, you can go back in and soften the edges even after the paint is dry. Not like when ink is once you put your ink down, that's it. You're stuck with whatever you put down initially. But with watercolor, you can go in and blend and shade and do all kinds of neat stuff with it. Okay, so basically we are almost finished with this. I'm going to put a couple more defining lines in here. And don't get too exact with this, just kind of, we're looking for balance and contrast here. Don't be too concerned that you're exactly in the right spot on the tree. These are distant trees, and in the long run, nobody can see it, nobody really cares. It just kind of helps to guide your eye around the painting. Okay, I think that's about enough. I might put, let's darken the bottom edge of this water a little bit. So I have to reload. See how much ink I was able, and there were still some in there. There's a, these pens hold a lot of ink. It just takes practice to load it up, to know how much to put in. And like I said, the pens do need to be broken in. The more you use them, the better they work. Okay, so that's just a little bit of detail work. I guess you would call this line and wash at this point. I'm only putting in the trunks and branches on the trees that are closest to us. I'm not putting them in the distant trees. And see how that pushes by putting these foreground trees in. And these are still like not really foreground. This would be the foreground here. This would be midground and then background. And that's what you look for in a painting, are those three planes: the background, the midground, and the foreground. So we have a lot of depth to this painting now. And I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. We could still fool with it a little bit, maybe put in a little more detail, but for the most part, I would call this finished. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out my other videos on YouTube under Watercolor Notebook, and see you next time.